All right, so we've already set up our HTML. We're going to move on to making sure your CSS is set up properly so we can start adding styles and learning how to float and clear. So you have learned this before, but I do want to just reiterate. I know sometimes this is the easiest thing, but it's the easiest thing to make a mistake on as well. So this is the line of code you use to, on line 5 right here, to create an external style sheet. So you use the link tag, the rel attribute that says style sheet, and then the href is basically linking to our style sheet. So the important thing to point out about this is that we are actually saving the CSS file inside of a folder called CSS. Okay, so I've already created a CSS file, but I do want to just walk through. You can basically create a new file, and when you save it, you are going to make sure that you save it inside of your CSS folder. It is very important that this is set up this way or the CSS file may not work. So before we get too far into coding, the best way to make sure that your CSS is set up correctly is to put in a few lines of code that are critical to helping you out moving forward, but also enough to be able to know whether or not your page is working. So I have added a body tag, which all of our pages have the body tag in HTML. So it's pretty common that we use universal styles that might affect the page everywhere. So one of those things is the background color. Okay, and I've just chosen a random color, so antique white. And then for the font, we've actually chosen to shorthand it. So I'll just explain what this means. 16 pixels is the font size. The / separates the font size from the line height. So the line height is going to be our space between our lines. And then our fonts. Okay, so basically I've chosen one font, and then we can choose a secondary, which is usually going to either be sans serif or serif. And then the last thing is margin. Okay, so margin by default on most browsers is going to be 10 or 20 pixels. And we're going to actually add it to 0, and I'll show you why. Let me just cut this out real quick and save it, and I'll show you what it looks like before and then after. So this is a very plain page with no CSS. You guys are already familiar with that. So if we add CSS, which I'll copy this back in, I don't know if you guys can see in the browser, there's a little bit of a margin on the outside, you know, and there's no styles to anything. So when we add in those styles, I don't know if you just saw my page change, but my background color changed, my font changed, and that spacing right here actually changed. So if I actually delete this one line real quick, notice how it gives me that little bit of space. So for the body, you do want to make sure you set your margin to be 0, and then add it back in as you need it. So with that said, that is going to be your first step. You just want to make sure that CSS file communicates with your HTML. If you do not have that part set up, you want to fix it immediately and figure out what's going wrong. Otherwise, you're going to waste a lot of time coding and the CSS won't appear for you. So I'd hate for that to happen. So I will have a separate screencast where we start walking you through the setup of the CSS and how we can actually get the rest of the page together.